So listen, as the best player on his team in those years, dev1ce clearly did play a part in his team being at that level, which then potentially allows him to get into these sorts of awards. But as I said before, he needs some help as well to get that done. And more crucially, I don't think he was the reason those teams were as good they were as someone like Simple in his best years or Ziwu is. His impact for me is more like Coldzera's or Elijah's. It's grinding consistency, high level average in terms of performance, the occasional monster series, but we're talking eye test wise here, not stats wise. Obviously these players have some very good series stats wise, but it ain't the same as when you watch a Simple and a Ziwu game in terms of the kills that those guys have to get to sometimes win the game or even fucking lose the game. Then you can ask yourself, right, so you obviously had the best teams overall, averaged over that time span. How good were his teammates? I've led up to it, right? That's the dynamic of the team that makes these lists dodgy for me, but more importantly, means that dev1ce, I'm going to get to at the end, is basically the only person who actually meets the requirements to even be on this scenario and have the chance to get into those placings on that list. If dev1ce is the greatest player of all time, based on career and overall accomplishments and rankings like this, how come people also go, put a pin in that, Glaive, got to be the best in-game leader of all time, hasn't he? Put a pin in that. Zonic, well, he's got to be the best coach of all time, hasn't he? Put a pin in that. The Astralis core, greatest core to ever play the game, quite frankly. Are you starting to see the issue? Something has to give, because it's the same matches being won and the same tournaments being won that's making everyone in Astralis the greatest simultaneously. Throw all that aside and talk about dev1ce's actual consistency in the game. I do think dev1ce's consistency is not just very impressive, but it's very impressive in the sense that he was like consistently a top player early in that ranking. The last sort of 3 or 4 years, he's just straight consistent in the game. I'm talking about in a final, against the best teams, in majors. That's why he got all those MVP awards just in the last few years, despite playing for so long overall. So to me, I think actually consistency was an issue he used to have earlier. He used to be a lot more streaky back in the day, because remember, he was actually just a hybrid AWP. He didn't even use the AWP all the time in 2014, 2015, even parts of 2016. So this is a time period when, yeah, you never know how dev1ce is feeling, whether he's going to get choke, whether he's going to get intimidated by a VP or a NIP or an SK or someone, whether he's just going to give up the AWP and therefore just get a few kills here and there, but not have a chance to win the game. This is something I used to talk to him when I used to have my little chats with him. I didn't ever tell him, like, you got to be, like, way better or, wow, you're just choking, it's fucking the whole game. I used to always stress to him, dude, all you might need is like 5% more in these games where you're choking and you win the game. It wouldn't even matter what else happened in the rest of your performance. I quoted him like a Bruce Lee quote. So I did this intro where I told him it's the daily decrease that matters, not the increase. Like, you just take away a few small little holes here and then to make the overall game come more consistent. It won't matter that there's players who people will consider better than you. Your performance will mean your team's in a position where if your team's good enough, you win the tournament anyway. That's what happens in that scenario. So in my opinion, what made dev1ce such a genius player the last few years isn't flashes of raw skill or just dominating the opponent. It's playing such a consistent game that the other pieces in Astralis can just get their shit together. dev1ce is always the one who comes back hard when the team rebounds. Think about end of last year. Think about in 2019 when they overtook Liquid again. He's the guy who spurs them up again. When he gets his game sorted, the others get theirs in place. Hence why I actually think some of those players get overrated for playing with dev1ce, by the way.
I'm not going that far. I think dev1ce is fucking great, right? Obviously. But the question I've had is he as consistent as people have made him out to be? Because I feel like part of being Mr. Consistent and Simple not being held as that consistent, even though I feel like he's recently, at least for the last maybe year and a half or a couple years, he's probably been pretty consistent.
Dude, you know the reason that fucks him? I'll tell you right now, because I understand the way like people construct narratives. I agree, but it's the same bullshit that we all do where we go, dev1ce is technically the best AWPer, and it's like, well, I mean, it depends how, that's because we're talking about the role of AWPer. Like, if we're actually saying who's the best at killing people with the AWP, it's Simple and Ziwu. Obviously, like, they win that. But we all do this fucked thing where we're trying to be, like, purists. So basically, what you're saying there, I agree with, is the reason dev1ce is super consistent is because in Astralis, at least, he never has a bad game. He's always like, up to a certain level. You can rely on him. Simple is just the best every fucking game. So technically, he should also be considered the most consistent, right? It's just, again, we're using some sort of fucked, like, way to... It's like we're telling him, and the problem is, mate, you're too good at everything, so we have to give other people some titles. Like, they have to get something, mate, So my problem is this. To me, if you don't know, back in the day in the Carrigan teams, sometimes dev1ce was mainly like the CT side AWPer because he could just hold his spot and be passive, and he just had very consistent aim. He wasn't the guy on T side, though, if you think of a map like Mirage, that does like the pug run up fucking mid and then just shoot the guy in window. He's not going to do that like Kenny S and Guardian, because that is literally just like fastest draw in the West, and it's like, if you kill me, you kill me. That's just over. He's more like he has to watch his fucking heat maps and his demos. So he has where's this guy going to be? CT side, you can do all the shit, yeah. But even then, I've always thought his style of play, that's why I don't think he's a game breaker. He does have like a passive element to his game. Now he's the master of it. He knows how to get the like for me, he's one of those amazing like plus minus players where it's like he'll get like so much, even if you can say he wouldn't go for the players Simple would, he'll also die like the minimum possible times it's any AWPer could ever die. So it's like, essentially I can't say be like Simple, because like you're doing the best a human can do. That's pretty fucking good. Now, this is a guy, this is why he's irreplaceable, who has the GOAT resume, the best resume in the history of CSGO. He is a contender just straight up for the best player of all time, even on other factors, just off his play. But you look at his resume, this instantly puts him in the conversation. He has the most MVP awards in history from HLTV.org. By the way, just in Astralis alone, remember he played for many years before Copenhagen Wolves and Dignitas and TSM, when it was the same core under different names. Just under the Astralis brand, he has won 14 MVP awards. For context, just his awards in Astralis would make him second all-time in history. Actually, no, wait a second. I'll say it another way, because obviously it's total awards. If we ignore everything dev1ce had done before he joined Astralis, he would still be the number one player in terms of MVP awards from HLTV.org, because Simple would only be at 12, Zero at 11, some of those for Zero were online as well, and dev1ce won 14 just in Astralis. So, by the way, that's also why it's so silly that people would do that nonsense angle of keeping saying, like, they're all just great players. Like, they can all win the MVP at any event. No, they can't all win the MVP at any event. Like, dev1ce can win the MVP at any event if they win. But you know what? Otherwise, Zipnix is going to have to mad overperform. Glave's going to have insane numbers. Like, Mega's going to have to dominate the whole event. Like, that's what's so silly about how people present their strats. And I suspect you're about to find out why that never was the case. That they were just 5 equally great players in terms of their impact in winning the game. dev1ce might be a truly great player, he is, but he has got ass taste in esports orgs. He went from TSM, what a moron owner they have in Reginald, to Astralis, who've done all sorts of shady shit and lied repeatedly themselves, now to NIP, the old check stealers, nothing in PayPal themselves. What the fuck? I mean, this guy must just be sad he was born too late in life to work with Enron and fucking Bernie Madoff. Holy moly, does this guy not care at all about the ethics and the morals of the people he works with? Just all about that chicken scratch here, baby. Give me a break. Because even though dev1ce is the best player in Astralis in Denmark, and he is an amazing player, you can make a case, and we can have that debate of him versus Simple, him versus Nico. I think him versus Nico for second in the year is actually the more interesting debate. People have just put it out their mind because they think Nico wasn't as good the last few months and Astralis wins everything, right? But I still think that's a much more interesting debate than dev1ce versus Simple, which I personally think is heavily in favour of Simple. But the problem is with dev1ce, the team, as I mentioned, it's almost set up so that if Astralis wins the tournament, logically dev1ce is going to be the MVP. If dev1ce plays terribly in a tournament, they're just not going to win the tournament. And since they're not having players who are super hard carry, put up the stats even if they lose, they're not generally going to get the MVPs if they lose. And voter fatigue means that even if dev1ce had godlike stats and they lost in the semi, people will think in their mind, he's had enough MVPs, Astralis have had enough MVPs, they'll win the next tournament, he'll get the MVP there, and they'll just give it to someone in the final, or they'll give it to someone who won the tournament. So actually, in that scenario, what's interesting is that people even almost see that their performances aren't that dominating because they can be just as good, but if they don't win the tournament, dev1ce isn't going to get that MVP, is it? It's going to be someone else, probably from the winning team, quite frankly. I'm talking about being a fan in the colloquial sense, essentially being an aficionado of something, caring about something, wanting to follow something, liking something more than other things. So when I say that, I don't mean I'm a fan of Astralis in the sentimental sense or for emotional reasons. I just love the guys too much. No, I mean, maybe after DreamHack Malmo one time or whatever. My point is, I'm not literally in love with dev1ce like some of you. Although if you did have to pick someone to be in love with. This is a team, though, where you look at some of the players that they've even got now. So you have dev1ce, probably the most underrated superstar in history. And I say that despite the fact he's won the most HLTV MVP awards, because right up until he did win those, and even during some of those, people were still hating. People were like, he isn't a superstar. He's not even the best player in Australia. It's like, well, just leave those people to where they are. This guy's proven himself unbelievable. I've written many articles, done many videos on the topic. You don't need to be wax lyrical now. Then, of course, you've got, and this is where they don't count as hybrids for my money, AWPers who choose to rifle and then are good at it. So like I say, dev1ce started as a rifler, then was a really good hybrid, then he became a primary AWP like 2016, 2017, going on, and then, especially when they got the amazing Magisk lineup of Astralis, he actually, on the right maps, would go back to a T-rifle. So for example, Inferno T-side's probably the most famous one. He was one of the big AWPers to just give that up and go with a rifle, and spoiler, they're probably the best Inferno team to ever play. Sometimes on Nuke, he would even do it. Obviously another, probably the best map ever for Astralis. And I actually think that flexibility was also what made Astralis completely OP. And everyone needs a support network, and mine is, of course, my Patreon community, the Scrominati, who in many ways, they're the Sonny to my Cher, saying, I got you, babe. So this video and all the others on my channel were kindly supported by the following names: Ahmed Hadjou, Mac Pugnatio Rajcula, Adam Tomlin, Animosity, Jensen Goh, Tosh, Toucan, and you know it. Jerky's Minion, my main man, always going to be referenced, one of the best patrons of all time. Would you like to ask a question in my AMA? Maybe you want to suggest a topic or a guest to say on my channel? Do you want teasers? Find out who the upcoming Reflections and Talk to Thorin interviews are. Maybe you want to do one of those long discussions where you get to set the topics we talk about. Well, if any of these or others appeal to you, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Scluminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.